Today I will tell a story that started with love but ended in betrayal. It will show how love can break a heart into pieces. Listen carefully. It can happen to anyone. Let's go. You know what the lousy thing about falling? It's not the actual hitting the ground, although that's damn painful too. No, the worst part is remembering how high you once soared. I, Greg Thompson, have learned this truth on my own skin, and believe me, it's a damn bitter lesson. Just a year ago, I was an NBA star, a rising luminary of the Chicago Bulls. My name rattled across the country, from the skyscrapers of the Windy City to the sunny beaches of California. I was living the dream, the one that every kid throwing a ball around in the backyard dreamed about. And gosh, how sweet that dream was. I remember how it all started. Growing up on the South Side, not the most affluent neighborhood in Chicago. My dad moved out when I was 5, leaving my mom alone with 3 kids. She worked 2 jobs to feed us, but money was always tight. Basketball became my salvation, my only way out of this vicious cycle of poverty and hopelessness. I spent hours on the court, practicing my shots, honing my technique. In the winter, when my fingers were numb from the cold, I kept practicing anyway. In the summer, when the asphalt was melting under my feet, I was there on the court with a ball in my hands. It wasn't just a game, it was my ticket to a better life. And so, after years of grueling workouts, sleepless nights, and endless sacrifices, I finally made it. NBA draft, first round, 7th pick, the Chicago Bulls select Greg Thompson. I remember how my hands trembled when I put on my cap with the iconic Bulls logo. How my mom cried with happiness as she hugged me. How my sisters squealed with delight. In that moment, I realized my life had changed forever. The first season was like a roller coaster. I was a rookie. I had to prove my right to a place in the lineup every minute. There were matches when I sat on the bench, swallowing resentment and anger. But I did not give up. Every free minute I spent in the gym, honing my body and skills. And gradually, game by game, I began to gain momentum. My first double-double against the Lakers. My last second game-winning shot against the Celtics. I remember every moment of my rise to the top. By the end of my second season, I was already in the starting 5, and my name started to be mentioned in conversations about future stars of the league. The third season was a breakout season. I averaged 24 points per game, 8 rebounds, and 5 assists. I was selected to the All-Star Game team and received the Most Progressive Player award. Journalists called me the new face of the Bulls, the heir to the great Michael Jordan. Boy, was I dizzy from that success. Every appearance on the United Center floor was like a drug. The roar of the crowd, the squeak of sneakers on the varnished floor, the clatter of the ball, this symphony was music to my ears. I was basking in the glory, reveling in my success. Brand contracts were pouring in. My face was on billboards all over Chicago. I was young, successful, and damn good at what I did. But you know what the most dangerous thing about success? It clouds the mind, makes you believe you're invincible. I thought I had the world at my feet, that it would always be like that. How wrong I was. And there she was, right next to me, Anne. God, she was beautiful. Long brown hair, whiskey-colored eyes, a smile that could melt even the coldest heart. We met at a team fundraiser. She was a volunteer helping with the organization. Our gazes met across the room and I was lost. I swear, in that moment I felt the same way I feel on the court seconds before the perfect shot. Absolute certainty that everything was going to work out exactly the way it should. Our romance grew rapidly. Anne was not just beautiful. She was smart, ambitious, with a great sense of humor. Next to her, I felt not just a basketball star, but a full-fledged person. She supported me in everything, was by my side after important games, consoled me after rare defeats. 6 months later, we already lived together in a luxury apartment overlooking Lake Michigan. I remember our evenings on the balcony. We sat wrapped in plaid, drank wine, and made plans for the future. Anne talked about her desire to start her own business. I dreamed of a championship ring. We were young, in love, and sure that together we could conquer the whole world. Life seemed perfect. I had a career that one can only dream of, a woman to love, money, fame, everything a man could want. I was sure it would always be like that. Hell, I was wrong. Everything changed in an instant. It was a regular game, A road game against the New York Knicks at Madison Square Garden. I was in great shape, warmed up properly, felt energized. The first quarter went great. I scored 15 points and grabbed 3 rebounds. And then, I remember it like it was yesterday. Fast break. I'm driving the ball to the basket, and I see a Knicks defender trying to cover me. I make a sharp turn to get away from the block and, oh my God, the pain. It's like a hot knife stabbed me in the knee. I collapsed on the floor, clutching my leg and howling in pain. The silence in the hall was deafening. I lay there, tears streaming down my cheeks, not so much from the pain as from the sudden, terrifying realization that something had gone very seriously wrong. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the team doctors running to me, heard the concerned voices of my teammates, but it all seemed so distant, unreal. The next few hours merged into one agonizing nightmare. Ambulance, hospital, MRI, worried faces of doctors. And then the verdict, a complete tear of the anterior cruciate ligament, extensive damage to the meniscus. Translated into human language, the end of the season, and possibly the end of his career. I didn't want to believe it. I convinced myself that it was just a minor setback, that I would recover quickly and get back on the court. Anne was by my side, holding my hand, whispering words of encouragement. But I could see the fear in her eyes, and that scared me even more. The long months of rehabilitation began. Mayo Clinic, top specialists, grueling workouts. I gritted my teeth and worked. The pain was hell, but I endured. For my comeback, for my dream, for Anne. Every day was a struggle. A struggle against the pain, against the limitations of my own body, against the growing despair. I spent hours on the machines, doing exercises that not so long ago would have seemed like child's play. Now every movement was difficult, every step was a small victory, but the longer the recovery lasted, the clearer I realized that I would not be able to return to the big sport. My knee was healing, but it was no longer mobile. I could walk, even run, but those crazy jumps and sharp turns, which were my specialty on the court, could be forgotten. And with that realization came another, even more painful one. I noticed Anne's attitude changing. She was coming to the clinic less and less often. Her visits were getting shorter. She said she was busy at work, that she was tired, but I sensed it was something else. Her eyes no longer held the admiration, the spark that used to light up when she looked at me. I tried to talk to her, to understand what was going on. But Anne waved me off, saying that everything was fine, that I was getting myself worked up. And then I noticed her texting someone, smiling at her phone, how she'd stay late at work, how she comes home smelling like someone else's cologne. My heart was breaking, but I kept quiet, afraid of losing her, afraid of being alone. I mean, what was I now? A former star, an invalid, unable to even walk. Who would want me like that? And then came the day when the doctors officially announced that I would not be able to return to professional sports. It was like a second verdict, the final collapse of all hopes. I returned home, expecting to find comfort in Anne's arms. But the apartment greeted me with silence and a note on the table. "Greg, I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore. It's too hard for me. I'm leaving. Please don't try to find me. Anne." I reread those lines over and over again, unable to believe it. Was this really it? Did our love, everything we'd experienced together, mean nothing to her? I dialed her number, but it was unavailable. I wrote a message, and it went unanswered. That night, I got drunk for the first time in years. I sat in an empty apartment, sipped whiskey straight from the bottle, and stared at the lights of Chicago at night. A city that had recently been at my feet, but now seemed to mock my fall. The morning greeted me with a brutal headache and an even more brutal reality. I was alone, with no career, no love, no purpose in life, and there was only emptiness ahead, filled with the pain and bitterness of betrayal. The morning greeted me with a brutal headache and an even more brutal reality. I was alone, with no career, no love, no purpose in life, and there was only emptiness ahead, filled with the pain and bitterness of betrayal. I struggled to open my eyelids, and the room swirled before my eyes. My mouth felt dry, like I'd swallowed sand, and my head felt like it was going to split open. Slowly, fighting the nausea, I sat up on the bed and looked around. Empty whiskey bottles were lying on the floor, a reminder of last night's night of despair. I tried to get up, but my knee was pierced by a sharp pain. I'd forgotten to put on my orthotics in the drunken frenzy. Hell, even my own body had betrayed me. Limping, I made it to the bathroom and stared at my reflection in the mirror. God, what had I become? A puffy face, red eyes, stubble I hadn't shaved in days. I barely recognized myself. Where had the confident guy whose smile shone from billboards all over Chicago gone? I turned on the cold water and splashed my face, trying to regain my senses. But along with the hangover haze, the saving numbness was gone. Reality came at me with all its ruthlessness. Anne was gone. She just walked away, leaving a cold note. A few lines that wiped out everything we had. All our dreams, all our plans, all our promises, all turned out to be lies. I went back to the bedroom and picked up my phone. No missed calls, no messages, from her. It was as if she'd cut me out of her life with a stroke of a pen. My fingers dialed her number, but all I heard in response was the indifferent voice of the answering machine. The caller is unavailable. Something inside me shattered. I collapsed on the bed, and a wave of despair came over me. How could she do this? After everything we'd been through together? I remembered how I'd supported her when she hadn't interviewed for her dream job. How I sat up nights with her when her grandmother died. I'd been there for her through some of the hardest moments of her life. And she just walked away when I needed her most. The bitterness and resentment overwhelmed me. I wanted to scream, wanted to smash something, but I didn't have the strength even for that. Instead, I lay staring at the ceiling and felt the emptiness growing inside. The ringing of the phone snapped me out of my daze. It was my agent, Tony. I hesitated before answering. I didn't feel like talking to anyone. But Tony was persistent. "Greg, where the hell have you been? I've been trying to reach you for days." His voice sounded concerned, but I could barely focus on his words. All I could think about was Anne and her betrayal. "Greg, can you hear me? We're in trouble. The sponsors want to tear up the contracts. We need to act fast." Sponsors, contracts. Those words once meant so much to me. But now they seemed like nothing. "I don't care, Tony." My voice sounded hoarse and lifeless. "Let them tear it up. I've got nothing left to lose." "What are you talking about? Greg, pull yourself together. We can fix this." "Yes, the injury is serious, but—" I interrupted him. "Anne's gone." There was silence on the other end of the line. Tony knew how much she meant to me. "Shit, buddy. I'm sorry. Really sorry. But listen, now's not the time to get discouraged. We need to—" I didn't get to hear what we needed. I just clicked off and turned my phone off. I didn't need his advice or his sympathy. I didn't need anything at all. The rest of the day passed like a blur. I wandered aimlessly around the apartment, every now and then bumping into things that reminded me of Anne. There's her favorite mug that she used to drink coffee out of in the morning. And here was the book she'd read before bed. Every little thing, every detail screamed her absence, breaking my heart. I walked over to the bar and pulled out a new bottle of whiskey. For a moment, I wondered if I should. But then I remembered the emptiness in Anne's eyes in the last days before she left, and my resolve strengthened. To hell with it. I wanted to forget, wanted to not feel this pain for a few hours. The whiskey burned my throat, but it was a pleasant pain. A physical pain I could control, unlike the one that was eating away at my soul. I drank without tasting, just wanting the alcohol to fog my mind as soon as possible. With each sip, the memories became more vivid. There was our first meeting at the fundraiser, Anne in the blue dress, her laughter taking my breath away. Our first kiss under the stars on the Michigan waterfront. Nights spent talking about the future, our dreams and plans. And then the last few weeks. Her detached gaze, the strained smiles, the awkward pauses in conversations. How could I have been so blind? How could I not see that I was losing her? Anger came on suddenly, displacing sadness and despair. I threw the glass at the wall, watching it shatter into thousands of shards, as if it were a metaphor for my life not long ago, whole and beautiful, but now shattered. "Why?" I screamed into the emptiness of the apartment. "Why did you do this to me?" But the answer to me was only silence. Silence and the echo of my own voice echoing off the walls. I collapsed to my knees, ignoring the pain in my injured leg. The tears I'd been holding back all day finally broke through. I sobbed like a child, choking on my sobs and cursing everything in the world, the injury that had robbed me of my career, Anne who had betrayed me at the worst possible moment, and myself for letting it all happen. I don't know how long I spent like that, sitting on the floor among the shards of a broken glass and my shattered life. When the tears finally dried up, I felt empty. But this emptiness was almost pleasant. There was no pain, no thoughts, no nothing. Staggering, I reached the bedroom and collapsed on the bed. The room was spinning before my eyes, but I didn't care. All I wanted was to forget myself, to fall asleep, and maybe wake up to find that it was all just a nightmare. But the dream wasn't coming. Instead, the thoughts that I had so diligently drowned in alcohol returned with renewed vigor. I thought about my career, about the years of training and sacrifice that had brought me to the top. It all seemed so distant now, as if it wasn't my life, but someone else's. And then I remembered my mom, how she worked 2 jobs to send me to basketball camp, how she always believed in me, even when no one else did. What would she say if she saw me now? The thought sobered me up better than any cold shower. I tried to get up, but the room spun with renewed vigor. Reaching the bathroom, I barely had time to lean over the toilet before I threw up. The bitterness in my mouth was disgusting, but strangely sobering. It was as if I'd spewed out all the pain and despair of the last few days along with the alcohol. I washed my face with cold water and looked at myself in the mirror again. A stranger was staring back at me, gaunt, red-eyed, with 3 days of stubble. This was not the Greg Thompson that all of Chicago knew, but maybe that was a good thing. Maybe old Greg had really died the moment his knee failed him on the grounds of Madison Square Garden. Maybe Anne's passing wasn't the end, but the beginning of something new? The thought was like a glimmer of light in the pitch darkness. A faint, barely discernible hope, but a hope nonetheless. I went back into the bedroom and picked up the phone. My fingers trembled as I dialed the number. Hello? The sleepy voice of Mike, my best friend since high school, sounded like a lifeline. Mike, I need help. My voice was shaky, but it no longer held the hopelessness it did an hour ago. Greg? Damn it, where the hell have you been? I'll be right there. I gave him the address and disconnected. Then I slowly lowered myself to the edge of the bed and closed my eyes. There was still a storm of emotions raging inside. Pain, resentment, fear of the future. But now there was something else mixed in. Something akin to determination. Anne was gone, leaving behind a void and pain. But I'm still here. Broken, lost, but alive. And maybe right now, at rock bottom, I'll find the strength to get up and start over. The doorbell rang as the first rays of dawn began to break through the curtains. Staggering, I went to open it. Mike stood on the threshold, his face contorted with worry. Jesus, Greg, you look terrible, he said, looking me over from head to toe. I wanted to snap, to say something caustic, but instead I just stepped back, letting him come in. Mike made his way into the living room, looking around. His gaze stopped at the empty whiskey bottles scattered around the room, the shards of a broken glass. Okay, buddy, that's enough, he said firmly. We're going to the hospital. I tried to object, to say I didn't need help, that I was fine, but Mike was adamant. He practically forced me into the car and drove me to the clinic. I was silent on the way, staring out the window at the waking city. Chicago was living its life, unaware of the drama unfolding in the soul of one of its yesterday's heroes. People were rushing to work. Stores were opening. Children were running through the streets. The days in the hospital stretched on endlessly. Every morning I woke up with the hope that it was all just a nightmare, but reality reminded me ruthlessly every time. The pain in my knee, the emptiness in my heart, and that damn note from Anne that felt like it was burned into my memory. Mike came by every day trying to support me. He brought news from the outside world, told me what was going on in the team, tried to distract me with talk about the future. But I barely listened to him. My thoughts kept coming back to Anne. I replayed our last few days together in my head, trying to find the moment when everything went wrong. Maybe if I had been more attentive, if I hadn't been so consumed with my injury and my career, maybe then she would have stayed. These thoughts were driving me crazy. I was angry at Anne for leaving, angry at myself for not being able to hold on to her. I was angry at the world for this injustice. One night, when the longing became unbearable, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed the phone and dialed her number. It was still out of range, but that didn't stop me. I left a voicemail, pouring out all my pain and resentment. Anne, how could you? After everything that happened between us? I loved you. I gave you everything. And you just walked away when things got hard. You're a coward, Anne. You hear me? You're a coward. I yelled into the phone, not caring that I might wake the other patients. A nurse came running at the noise, but I was already finished. I sat on the bed, breathing heavily, with the phone in my hand and tears in my eyes. The next morning I was ashamed of my outburst, but in a strange way, I felt relieved. It was as if by letting those emotions out, I was able to cleanse my soul a little from the poison that was poisoning me from the inside out. Mike, when he heard about my nighttime exploits, didn't lecture me. Instead, he brought me a book. "What's this?" I asked without much interest. "Man in Search of Meaning" by Viktor Frankl. "I think it might help you." I looked at the book skeptically, but out of respect for my friend, I decided to at least try to read it. And that decision changed everything. Frankl's story of surviving the horrors of a concentration camp and finding the strength to not only survive, but to help others shook me to my core. I read about how people in the most horrible conditions found meaning in life, and I felt something inside me begin to change. When a person cannot change a situation, he must change himself. This phrase from the book was a revelation to me. I couldn't change the past. I couldn't bring back Anne or my NBA career, but I could change my attitude about what was going on. I started talking more with Mike, with doctors, even with other patients. Gradually, I began to see that I wasn't the only one suffering. Everyone had their own story of loss, their own pain, and many found the strength to move on. One day, during another physical therapy session, I met Jake, a former Marine who had lost a leg in Afghanistan. His optimism and cheerfulness struck me. "How can you be so positive?" I asked him one day. Jake smiled. "What's the point of being different? The leg isn't going to grow back, no matter how much I grieve. So all that's left is to move on and do the best I can with what I have." His words made me think. Really, what's the point of my endless self-abuse? Would it bring Anne or my career back? Slowly, day by day, I began to change. I became more involved in rehab. I started to wonder about the possibilities of life after sports. I even started thinking about a coaching career. The pain of Anne's betrayal didn't go away. It was still there, deep inside. But now it wasn't that sharp, tearing pain, but more of a dull, aching pain. Something I could live with. I didn't try to call or write to her anymore. Instead, I started writing letters I never intended to send. In them, I poured out all my thoughts and feelings, saying goodbye to our dreams and plans. In one such letter, I wrote, "Anne, I don't know why you left. Maybe you were afraid of hardship. Maybe you just fell out of love with me. But you know what? I'm grateful to you. I'm grateful for all the good things we had together. And even this pain, because it made me reevaluate my life, made me stronger." It was painful to write those words, but it hurt even more to realize their truth. Anne's betrayal had truly changed me, made me see life in a new light. Weeks in the hospital turned into months. My knee slowly but surely recovered. I knew I would never be able to play professionally, but the prospect of just walking without pain already seemed like a victory. One day, as I sat in the hospital garden enjoying a rare sunny day, Mike approached me. He had an envelope in his hand. "This came to your old address," he said, holding out the letter to me. I recognized the handwriting on the envelope immediately. Anne. My heart beat faster. My hands trembled. I didn't know if I wanted to read this letter. I was afraid it might ruin everything I'd worked so hard to rebuild. Mike, as if reading my thoughts, put his hand on my shoulder. "You don't have to read it now, or ever. It's your choice, Greg. I stared at the envelope for a long time, weighing the pros and cons. Then I slowly opened it and began to read. Dear Greg, I know I have no right to write to you after I left, but I must explain. Anne's words, so familiar and yet so foreign, seemed to transport me back in time. I could feel the old pain rising up inside, but now it wasn't so sharp. In her letter, Anne talked about her fears, how she was scared of responsibility, her uncertainty about the future. She apologized, saying she was sorry for what she had done. Finished reading, I folded the letter and looked at Mike. He was waiting, asking no questions. You know, I finally said, a month ago, this letter would have turned my whole life upside down. I probably would have rushed out to find Anne, to beg her to come back. But now, I fell silent, searching for words. Mike waited patiently. I realize now that it doesn't matter anymore. Anne made her choice then, and I'm making mine now. I'm grateful to her for what we had between us, and for that lesson too. But my life doesn't depend on her anymore. Saying that, I felt like a heavy weight was falling off my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. Mike smiled and hugged me tightly. I'm proud of you, friend. In that moment, I realized this was truly the end of one chapter of my life, but it was also the beginning of a new one. A chapter in which I would be stronger, wiser, and maybe even happier. I didn't yet know what lay ahead of me. I didn't know if I would ever love as much again. I didn't know if I would find my new calling, but I knew one thing. I was ready to face the future face to face, without fear or regret. Being discharged from the hospital was both a relief and a challenge for me. On the one hand, I was glad to finally leave the sterile walls that had become too familiar over the past months. On the other hand, I was afraid of returning to the real world, where every corner would remind me of my past life. Mike offered to let me stay with him until I got back on my feet, literally and figuratively. I agreed, realizing that going back to Anne and I's apartment would be too painful. The first few days in the new place were strange. I felt like a guest not only in Mike's house, but also in my own life. Simple things, like making breakfast or watching TV, seemed unfamiliar, as if I were learning them all over again. But gradually I began to get used to the new reality. Mike helped me with my knee exercises, which the doctors strongly encouraged me to continue at home. Every morning, we went out jogging together. I was limping more than running, of course, but it was a start. One morning, coming back from such a run, I saw a stack of newspapers on the kitchen table. Mike, noticing my glance, said, I was thinking maybe you should think about getting a job. I know you haven't fully recovered yet, but... I picked up the top newspaper and began leafing through the jobs section. Most of the offers seemed absurd. Who could I work for? A former basketball player with no college education and an injured knee is not the most attractive candidate on the labor market. But one ad caught my eye. A local school was looking for a coach for their basketball team. Not professional sports, of course, but something close and familiar. Think I have a shot? I asked Mike, showing him the ad. He smiled. You've got every chance, buddy. You're a freaking NBA star. Former star, I corrected him. But there was already a spark of hope igniting in my chest. The next day, I called the school and set up an interview. As I prepared for the interview, for the first time in a long time, I felt the excitement similar to what I felt before important matches. The interview went strange. The headmaster, Mr. Johnson, was clearly impressed with my resume, but concerned about my injury. Mr. Thompson, your experience is certainly impressive, but can you physically handle the coaching duties? I looked him straight in the eye. Mr. Johnson, I may not jump as high as I used to or run as fast, but I know the game. I know how to teach young athletes, how to motivate them, and I know what it means to overcome adversity. Isn't that what we're supposed to teach kids? My answer seemed to impress him. After a few more questions, he shook my hand. Welcome to the team, Coach Thompson. As I walked out of the school, I couldn't hold back a smile. I had a job to do. I had a goal. This was the start of something new. My first day as a coach was chaotic, to say the least. The teenagers looked at me with a mixture of admiration and skepticism. Yes, they knew who I was, but to them, I was more of a legend than a real person. "Hey, coach, is it true you could score over the top through 3 defenders?" One of the boys, Jason, the most spry of the whole team, asked. I smiled, remembering those times. It was. But you know what's more important? Being able to work as a team. Because even the coolest dunk isn't worth anything if your team loses. That answer seemed to impress them. I started the practice by showing the basic drills. My knee was whining, but I tried not to show any pain. These kids needed to see me as a strong leader, not a broken man. As the weeks went by, I was getting more and more involved. Each day brought new challenges, but also new joys. I saw my charges grow not only as athletes, but also as individuals. It gave me a sense of fulfillment that I hadn't experienced even in my best days in the NBA. One day after practice, Jason, that spry kid from day one, came up to me. "Coach, can I ask you a question?" He looked unusually serious. "Sure, what's wrong? Do you miss big sports? The glory, all of it?" I wondered. It wasn't an easy question, and I knew Jason was expecting an honest answer. "You know, Jason, sometimes I miss it. There are days when I wake up and forget for a second that everything has changed, but then I come here, and I see all of you, and I realize what I'm doing now is just as important, maybe even more important." Jason nodded, clearly considering my words. "Thank you, Coach, for your honesty." This conversation got me thinking. Was I really happy with my new life? Or was I just convincing myself that I was? That evening of the same day, I shared my thoughts with Mike. He listened to me and then said, "Greg, remember what you told me at the hospital? About how every fall is an opportunity to rise higher. Maybe this is your chance." His words hit the mark. I really enjoyed working with the kids, seeing them grow, seeing them succeed. It gave me a sense of purpose that I was sorely lacking after my injury. But something still bothered me, some kind of incompleteness, and I realized I knew the reason. The next day, I took the day off and drove to Ann and I's apartment. I hadn't been there since the day she left. As I opened the door, I felt my heart pounding in my chest. The apartment looked exactly as I remembered it. Pictures on the walls, Ann and I's belongings as if frozen in time. I walked slowly through the rooms, reminiscing. This is where we cooked dinner after my games. This is where we watched movies on the weekends. And this is the chair I sat in when I proposed to her. Every corner was saturated with memories. But in a strange way, those memories didn't hurt anymore. They were like old photographs, a little faded, but still treasured. I began to gather Anne's things, her clothes, her books, her cosmetics. I put them all neatly in boxes. I don't know why I was doing this. Maybe it was my way of finally letting go of the past. When I was done, the apartment looked empty. But this emptiness didn't depress me as I had feared. On the contrary, it was like it was opening up space for something new. I sat down on the couch and pulled out my cell phone. Anne's number was still in my contact list. I don't know what came over me, but I pressed the call button. The dial tone took forever. I was about to reset when I heard her voice. "Hello, Greg?" I was speechless for a second. So many times I had envisioned this moment, and now it had come. "Hi, Anne." My voice sounded calmer than I expected. I packed up your stuff. Thought you might want to pick them up." A pause on the other end of the line. Then, "Greg, thank you. I didn't know how to ask for this." We arranged a time when she could come over. The conversation was short, but not as painful as I had feared. As I hung up the phone, I felt strangely relieved. It was as if the last piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. The next few days flew by. I went to work preparing the team for the first match of the season. The guys were delighted with my training, and their enthusiasm energized me. On the eve of the match, I stayed in the gym practicing with Jason his shot. The kid was talented, but not confident enough. "Jason, remember, it's not the power of the shot that matters. It's the technique. Concentrate on proper hand position, body balance." He nodded and took another shot. The ball traveled beautifully through the net without touching the ring. "Wow," Jason exclaimed, looking at me wide-eyed. I smiled. "See? You can do it. Just believe in yourself like I believe in you. In that moment, I realized I had found my calling. I may not have been able to play at the professional level anymore, but I could pass on my experience and knowledge to these kids, help them become not only better athletes, but better people. The next day was the meeting with Anne. I was nervous, but I tried not to show it. When she walked into the apartment, I was speechless for a moment. She looked as beautiful as I remembered her. "Hi, Greg," she said quietly. You look good." "Thanks," I replied, trying to remain calm. "Your stuff is in those boxes." We stood in awkward silence. There was so much I wanted to say, but the words seemed stuck in my throat. Finally, Anne broke the silence. "Greg, I need to apologize. The way I left, it was wrong." I took a deep breath. "You know, Anne, I've been mad at you for a long time. Resentful. Didn't understand how you could do that. But now, I'm just grateful." She looked at me in surprise. "Grateful?" "Yes, for all the good things between us, and even for the way it ended. Because it made me reevaluate my life, find a new path." Anne looked confused. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I replied softly. "Just know that I don't hold a grudge against you, and I hope you find your happiness." We said goodbye without further ado. When the door closed behind Anne, I felt as if a heavy weight had fallen from my shoulders. It really was goodbye, not just to Anne, but to a part of my life that was in the past. 3 months had passed since the day Anne had picked up her things. Life was slowly falling into a new direction, but sometimes the memories came flooding back with renewed vigor. On one such day, I was sitting in a coffee shop, trying to focus on training plans for my team. Suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a familiar figure. Anne. She was standing at the counter ordering coffee. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't seen her since that day. She looked good, calm and confident. For a moment, I was overcome with the urge to walk over, to speak, but I stayed where I was. Anne, taking her coffee, turned and saw me. There was a look of surprise on her face, then something akin to embarrassment. She hesitated for a second, then gave me a slight nod and walked out of the cafe. That brief moment stirred up a storm of emotions in me. Sadness, resentment, nostalgia, all mixed into one ball. But in a strange way, I also felt relief. When I saw Anne, I realized that I was no longer in the same acute pain as before. That evening, I called Mike. "Can you believe I saw Anne today?" I said as we exchanged greetings. "Wow," I could hear the concern in Mike's voice. "And how are you?" I wondered. "You know, it's weird. I thought it would hurt more, but I feel calm, I guess." Mike was quiet for a second. "That's a good sign, Greg. Means you've really moved on." His words made me wonder. Had I really moved on? Or had I just learned to hide the pain better? The next day at practice, I was distracted. My thoughts kept returning to my meeting with Anne. Jason, the youngest on the team, noticed my condition. "Coach, are you okay?" he asked after practice. I looked at him, surprised by his observation. "Yeah, just tough day." Jason nodded with a serious look. "You know, when I'm sad, I always remember what you said, about how every game is a new chance. Maybe it's like that in life too." His words struck me with their simple wisdom. I had indeed said that to the team, but I had never applied that philosophy to my own life. "Thanks, Jason," I said, feeling something change inside. "You're very wise for your years." I sat for a long time that evening, pondering Jason's words. Every day is a new chance, not just to move on, but to actually start something new. I pulled out my notebook and started writing. Not training plans, but my thoughts, feelings, dreams. All the things I wanted to do but was afraid or thought were impossible. To my surprise, I wrote several pages. Travels I'd always put off. A book I've wanted to write for a long time. A charity to help young athletes from disadvantaged backgrounds. Looking at this list, I suddenly felt a surge of energy and enthusiasm that I hadn't felt in a long time. It was like a second wind. The next day, I called Tony. Tony, remember when you talked about the possibility of becoming a sports commentator? Is that offer still on the table? Of course. I could hear the surprise and joy in Tony's voice. Are you seriously considering it? More than that. Also, I have an idea for a charity project. Can you help with contacts? We talked for over an hour going over the details. When I hung up the phone, I felt myself smiling. For the first time in a long time, I had a plan, a goal. The next weeks flew by like a day. I was torn between training the team, preparing for my first tryouts as a commentator, and developing a plan for the charity. There was no time for sadness or self-reflection, and I noticed that I was thinking about Anne less and less. It's not that I'd forgotten her. I hadn't. But the memories of our time together were no longer painful. They had become part of my past, experiences that had helped me become who I was now. One evening, on my way back from practice, I saw Anne again. She was walking across the street, holding hands with some man. They were laughing about something, looking perfectly happy. I expected a prick of jealousy or resentment. But instead I felt relief? Yes, relief. And even something akin to joy for her. I didn't call out to Anne, I just went on my way. And suddenly I realized I was smiling. Not because of Anne, but because of the realization that I had really let her go, letting go of our past. At home, I sat down at my computer and opened the file I'd started writing a few weeks ago. It was a story, my story, of ups and downs, of love and betrayal, of loss and new beginnings. I started typing and the words flowed. I wrote about my journey into the sport, about fame and its price, about the injury that changed everything, about Anne and our love, about the pain of separation and the hard road to acceptance. But most of all, I wrote about what I realized along the way, that every fall is a chance to rise above, that the end of one chapter of life is always the beginning of a new one, and that true strength is not in never falling, but in always finding the strength to rise. I wrote all night, stopping only to drink coffee. When the first rays of sunlight entered the room, I leaned back in my chair, feeling strangely peaceful. This story, my story, was far from over. But I felt like I had accomplished something important, not just for myself, but perhaps for others going through similar trials. I saved the file and closed the computer. There was a new day ahead, full of new possibilities, and I was ready to face it with an open heart and a clear mind. Looking out the window at the waking city, I suddenly realized that I felt gratitude. Gratitude for everything that had happened to me, both good and bad. Because every event, every person in my life has made me who I am now. I smiled at my reflection in the window. The man looking back at me from there was no longer a broken basketball star or a jilted lover. This was the new Greg, stronger, wiser, and ready for new challenges. There was a lifetime of opportunity ahead of me, and I was ready to live it to the fullest. The phone rang. It was Tony. "Greg, are you ready? Today's your first day as a commentator." I took a deep breath, feeling the familiar excitement. But now it was a pleasant excitement, the anticipation of something new and exciting. "Yes, Tony, I'm ready." And I was indeed ready, ready for a new chapter of my life, for new challenges and victories, ready to move forward, not forgetting the lessons of the past, but not letting it pull me backwards either. I walked out of the house with the feeling that a new phase of my life was beginning, a stage in which I will not just exist, but live life to the fullest. And who knows, maybe one day I will meet someone who will share this new life with me. But even if that doesn't happen, I knew one thing for sure. I am no longer afraid of the future. I'm ready to embrace whatever it brings me and make the best of what I have.